This is Robert Kraft, and I'm your host on SNN.Network. And with me today is a familiar face to the program now, Mr. John Vandermosten, who is the Senior Biotech Analyst at Zacks Small Cap Research. John, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Bobby. We got California weather out here in Dallas, so
Oh,
it's
nice,
good.
nice. It's actually just starting to turn for us too. But hey, look, it's been a crazy week. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a biotech analyst about what's going on with coronavirus. So I gotta let's start there. Let's get your take. What have you been seeing going
Sure.
on?
Yeah, I can start off kind of on the big picture. When we see coronavirus and the number of cases in the US compared to the regular flu, I was just doing some research before our talk here and looked up on the CDC site, and they said there were something like 22 million Americans that have had the flu for the flu season so far, since it's been about 4 months. And there's been about 12,000 deaths. And then you compare that with coronavirus, where I think there's been less than 100. I think we were saying that. Actually, I'm looking right now. As of February 26th, there were 14 confirmed cases in the U.S. So, really from a risk perspective, in the United States anyway, it's the coronavirus is way down there compared to the regular flu.
Gotcha. But so then I guess continuing on that macro perspective, you know, this has been a crazy week in the markets, a lot of panic selling, because
Yeah.
of fears on the coronavirus. I mean, from your perspective, I know there's been a few interviews out there and a lot of different reporting on, just how it can spread. I mean, can you speak to your experience, in seeing different viruses and flus and different pandemics that have been out there, like from SARS and MERS? How does this affect the potential day to day? I mean, is the noise matching the reality?
Yeah, well, I mean, just from a macro perspective on that, and then I can talk about maybe some company-specific things that are going on. But the incubation period is really important. I think one thing to pay attention to and how it may spread further, because if you don't show signs of the disease for a very long time, then you could spread it for potentially a longer amount of time, and then it's just harder to control those that have it. So that's one thing I don't think we know yet. And then also just people being afraid of going out and doing normal economic activity, traveling. I mean, I can't tell you how many deals I've got on cheap flights over the last few days. So you can tell the airlines are kind of hurting a little bit with that. If people aren't going to Starbucks, if they aren't going out to, and also supply lines, that's another thing too from a macro perspective. It's going to hold up supply, which is going to slow down production. So, from a macro perspective, even though, a lot of people may not eventually catch it, it's still going to impact the economy from a larger sense. But then if we shift into just some of the individual companies and what they're doing kind of in my universe, a lot of the well-known vaccine makers, have announced plans on Johnson and Johnson. I got a list over here. Sanofi, that's another big one. Actually, Sanofi is working with a company that I know very well called Dyadic. Sanofi is a well-known vaccine maker, and generally what they try to do is they take these through clinical trials process. And I've seen that there have been some clinical trials that have actually started so far, which is pretty quick. The genesis of putting together a vaccine is first you have to sequence it, find out what it is, then you have to go into the lab and kind of grow it a bit, and then you have to take it into human trials to get it approved. And then actually the hardest part is when you eventually manufacture and produce it. If you're familiar with kind of how the flu virus is done now, it takes 4 to 6 months to get the virus grown in chicken eggs and then shipped around for people to get the flu virus. So what we really need to find is a way to get that done much faster. And Sanofi, as I said, is working with a company I know, Dyadic, who actually may be able to rapidly make both a vaccine and potentially a treatment for it as well.
And real quick, shareholder in Dyadic, J&J, or Sanofi?
Zacks covers Dyadic, but we have no positions or interest in the other companies.
Got it. And so, you hit on something that I was just going to ask you because, this past week, I've been monitoring kind of the small micro nano cap biotech space and some of maybe the providers of, goods and services for the medical industry. And you've been seeing some of these companies just, 100% growth days. I mean,
Sure.
some of them have come back down since, of course, based on news that they've also put out saying, they've either partnered or working on a vaccine, so again, here, noise versus reality. Let's kind of go through, what you kind of alluded to it already with when you were talking about Dyadic and Sanofi, but, from in a, I guess in a more broad perspective, how do we sift through also again here, the noise versus the reality?
Sure, and I think there's two components to it. One is I think the initial enthusiasm is probably a little bit overdone because it will take a long time for these to get both approved and then manufactured and distributed, and there's going to be lots of partners. However, one thing I will say is infectious disease does not receive the attention it deserves, and this outbreak potentially will open up some funding for the longer term investment that we really do need to make in in infectious disease and viruses, because we do not do enough to address this, and hopefully this will wake us up and open up some funding for longer term. So in that sense, these jumps that we've seen from there's another company that was really hot in the first few days, Inovio, because they had a grant from the government as well. And if they're successful and the funding keeps on coming, that increase is completely justified.
Right. And real quick, Inovio, Zacks.
We have actually worked with them in the past.
Okay.
Do not currently, but they have a great portfolio. Gotcha. And yes, they have been a client.
Gotcha. And then so taking it really from there, I mean, the big thing, especially like in California right now, Governor Newsom just announced they're monitoring 8,400 people, and they're saying that they're severely low on the actual test kits. I mean, are there any companies? You don't have to name names specifically, but I feel like that's also a big opportunity right now, is to really get more of these test kits out there so that they can at least diagnose it properly.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. I have seen a few articles on that. And actually, the most interesting thing is that there's this one company that makes the face masks. I can't remember the name right now. I was just reading about it. And they were up over 600%. Maybe you know the name, but I assume they're a small company, and they're the one that makes that, I think, N95. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. But that was a good pick if you owned that a couple months ago and held on to it. So yeah, I mean, there's opportunities like that, but I think I also heard the federal government is going to try to push companies to shift their production towards some of these items if they're if they're spending some money on some things that aren't immediate, they're going to shift. The government's going to ask them to shift their resources towards some of these test kits and the masks and other preventative devices.
Gotcha. All right. So to kind of wrap up our coronavirus conversation, I mean, let's say you're speaking to more long-term focused let's get your perspective on the short-term and the long-term, because
sure.
Because I'm sure some people out there have been making a lot of short-term decisions based on some of this panic out there, but at the same time, there's a lot of long-term focused investors that are like, okay, there's a lot of noise out there and whatnot. So, for both perspectives, how should investors really just tackle what's going on in the markets right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my space, in the biotech space, these guys are driven by the success in their portfolios. They're driven by clinical success. So I think with a lot of the sell-offs that you've seen, this could be a buying opportunity for some of those, because they're not so attached to the economic cycle. I mean, if consumers buy fewer Starbucks, they're still going to need treatment if they have cancer, and if the drugs work for the companies that I cover, that's not going to really make a lot of difference. So from that perspective, I think it's good for a buying opportunity for companies that aren't leveraged at all towards coronavirus. For companies that are leveraged towards coronavirus, I think this could lead to additional funding. Again, I mentioned Dyadic, which we work with very closely here. They actually, another thing that they did is they increased their relationship with the IIBR, it's the Israeli Biotech Defense Group, to use their product with them to come up with a coronavirus vaccine and treatment as well. So it's, I think this could spur a lot more investment in infectious disease, which again, has not received the attention it's deserved for a long time. So those are the opportunities that I say. And, one example that I'll give, again, kind of pitching the name that we cover here and that we, as a client of Zacks, is Cellsci. They got hammered pretty badly over this period. But they're working on a cancer drug for squamous cell head and neck cancer. And I don't think the coronavirus is really going to affect the outcome of their trial or affect the ultimate sales of their product. So for investors who were interested in that name before, this might be a good time to get in. And I have other names as well that have sold off that could also be attractive. But that's how I look at it.
Gotcha. All right, so let's segue into actually, we had a whole other topic in mind that we planned on doing today, but with coronavirus and everything, we obviously had to talk about it. But the main topic that we wanted to get to today was actually screening for biotech stocks, and how you go about looking for potential opportunities. And quite frankly, this is actually using coronavirus maybe as our lead example. That could be something interesting that we can use to help. When you're actually going through and doing your screens, so starting off, what are some of the things that you do and screen for when you're looking for potential new opportunities?
Yeah, screening for biotechs is a little bit different from screening for companies that have been around for a while. Because, when you think about it, a company that's established has revenues, they have gross margins, they have earnings, they have earning estimates, they have cash flows that are tied to things. They have inventory levels that also are sometimes used in the screen, and earnings estimates as well.
Right.
You don't have all of these things in the small cap biotech. I mean, really the only quantitative items that you can pull that I think are useful from the financials are potentially the cash levels and the cash burn rate.
Right.
And this just gives you a sense of how long they can survive without having to raise capital, right? So you want to look, when you're screening, you're going to have to do a little bit more work than just the computer work. You're going to have to dig in a little bit deeper. But you could start there with looking at who has at least a year of cash on hand. And if you take another deeper look from that, you can look at when their next milestone is for perhaps a trial readout or some kind of regulatory milestone as well. Because you want to make sure a company that you buy in the biotech space has enough cash to kind of make it to that point, plus a little bit further in case something happens.
Right.
So that would be the first screen, I'd say.
Okay, so for the total noobs out there, and I'm going to include myself there, so I mean, I've done a little bit of screen, but let's say you go in, you put your quantitative metrics in there for cash flow and then also for burn rate, right?
Sure.
From there, what tools have you used to help on the, I guess you'd say more of the qualitative, when they're going to get readouts for some of their clinical trials? I mean, I've done the research and I know that there's a lot of different research firms out there that charge you an arm and a leg where, they'll give you the full list of all the, upcoming trial results when they're coming. But I don't know if everybody has that kind of coin to get that info.
A great place to start with any company is their corporate presentation, if they have one. I'd say 90% of companies have a corporate presentation. And if they've done it well, they'll provide a list of milestones in there of what's coming up next. I think that's a great place to start for any investor, is with the corporate presentation and of course Zacks Research. But you can go in there and you can find out what indication they're pursuing. Sometimes they'll even discuss the competitive environment, because you really want a therapy that's in an area where there's an unmet need. And this is important for two reasons. One, because you're not going to have a lot of other drugs to compete with, to fight with, to get market share. And number two, the FDA is always more amenable to approving something when there's an unmet need. So if you find a company that has checked off these two boxes, then that's another good start. And then while we're talking about management, that's another box to check off. Does the management team have experience taking a product through the drug development process and working with the FDA and potentially getting it approved? I mean, if you've done that, that's a really good check for your company, when you're looking at it as an investor.
Right. Well, I actually want to even take a step back again, because let's say you're doing a screen and you're just looking at cash flow and cash burn. I mean, if you're just saying biotech in general, that is still a huge universe of companies that will probably turn up on your screen, even if you're giving it certain metrics,
Sure.
Whatever it is, like million a month or whatever that burn rate and cash on the balance sheet actually happens to be, So I mean, do you tend to, like, using coronavirus, for example? I mean, would you recommend for at least even that initial screen is like, okay, if you're, let's say, interested in coronavirus and you want to do cash burn and total cash on the balance sheet, do you recommend then starting with, okay, if you're interested in one particular aspect of biotech, or, let's say coronavirus, doing something like that first and then going to the next level?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking. So the therapeutic area, which therapeutic area should you pursue,
Yeah.
right? What's kind of popular right now? And I think I mean, you kind of actually answered what I should have said next, or asked me what I should have said next. You want to pick something that's kind of been, I hate to say hot, but something that's been recognized by big pharma as an area where they want to go. And actually, I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago in a panel. Two of the areas that have been have received a lot of interest in M&A and also in IPO has been gene therapy. And then we also have had a lot of interest in precision medicine for oncology with mutations. And, these are some specific areas, but there have been many, many deals in these two areas. And actually just today, surprisingly enough, a company called Passage Bio, they're an adeno-associated virus gene therapy company working on some rare diseases. They actually IPO'd today at the high end of their range, and they were up a couple bucks during a week like this. So I think that's amazing, and it shows you just the interest in gene therapy that there is right now. So I think it's PASG. We have no interest in them and don't really know too much about them at Zacks, but it's just, I find it interesting that has done well. So that's what I would say also is look what has done well in M&A, look at what's done well in IPOs, and use that as a guide to find some other areas, because that's probably where the big companies are gonna acquire in the future.
Got it. All right. So just, for those who they're listening to this interview, like, okay, got the metrics, you kind of laid out the level 2, level 1, what to look for. What resources then should that investor use to then find some of these companies in that discovery phase?
Well,
like, what do you use?
Yeah, what do I use? I just try to look at as many companies as possible, because I'm sure there's some services out there that'll break them down by the different therapeutic areas. But sometimes when you look at your for some investors, maybe they look at Yahoo Finance or Google Finance, they'll kind of group companies in the same area. But I think you can search for gene therapy companies. I've found some good blogs out there where they summarize all the gene therapy companies or all the cancer companies that are focused on a certain area. I think that would be a great way to go. And then when you find the companies, some of them are private, some public, then you can go on Bloomberg or some of the other systems like that and look a little bit deeper in terms of the metrics and things like that. But there are a number of you just got to do a lot of reading.
Yeah,
that's
and really Google is your best friend. It sounds like, because it sounds like I've used Screener.co and Finviz and all these very advanced screening technologies. But it sounds like, at least for you, what's worked best is just coronavirus companies, gene therapy companies on Google. It sounds like that's really the best place to at least start.
Yeah, well, I actually looked at just news releases in the biotech space, and every company that has an interest or some vertical into coronavirus has had a press release. Right. So if you look on a site where it has all the biotech, where it has all the biotech news, like I think I use biospace.com. I think that's the name of it, and they have a news feed. Or Fierce Biotech, that's another one. You'll see the articles on there, and that'll show you who's in the space, because they have pretty good journalists.
Those are pretty good ones. Yeah. I know them for a long time.
I recommend as well. Yeah. To find good companies, because biotech requires a lot more work than other areas. Because there have been I think last year since January 2019 there have been 60 biotech IPOs. So that's 60 new companies in this space. So it's a lot to know. So you got to always be in there digging around.
That's for sure. All right, John. So final thoughts as we close out this freaking crazy week and and looking ahead. What's your final take then?
Well, as you asked before, are there any opportunities here? I think there are, for some names that aren't leveraged to change in consumer sentiment or change in GDP growth, and aren't leveraged directly to coronavirus because they've sold off, right? So if you thought that they were good 6 days ago, they're probably cheaper now, and they're probably even better, even more upside.
Gotcha.
So that's probably the thought I'd leave you with.
Perfect. And John, you mentioned earlier a company that makes the N95 masks. Just disclosure real quick.
Yeah, we had a chance to kind of do a little research because I forgot the name, but it's Alpha Protech, and they went from around $5 to $37, but now it's off because probably some investors are saying 7 times return is a little bit high. But yeah, make face masks, make hay while the sun shines.
Where can my audience go and find more information about you and small cap or Zacks Small Cap Research?
Yeah, so for Zacks, scr.zacks.com, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's a great way to get all of my research and all of my news and all of the other interesting things that are happening. It's at VanJohn10 on Twitter.
Perfect.
So,
John, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for joining me.
all right, thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.